Does the economy feel fragile to you? The stock market, your job, the very idea that your children will live a better life than you. For nearly a century, this was the American dream, a promise of upward mobility, a bedrock of social stability. Today, it feels like a distant, flickering memory. You are told by the experts on television that we are in a slowdown, a recession, or a necessary correction. They use comforting words like soft landing. But what if this deep, gnawing feeling of fragility, this sense that the entire system is a house of cards, is not just a feeling? What if it is the simple, terrifying truth? What if this isn't a recession? What if this is, in fact, the big one? The mainstream media scoffs at this. They tell you, it can't happen again. The system is too strong. We have safeguards. We learned our lesson from 1929. But that, right there, is the single greatest lie of our modern era. We did not learn from the 1929 playbook. We are repeating it, step for step. The same forces, the same fatal mistakes, and the same centralized planners that engineered the single greatest economic collapse in modern history are in full control today. To understand the crisis that is unfolding in 2026, you must first understand the lie of 1929. The story of 1929 does not begin with a crash, it begins with a party. They called it the Roaring Twenties, a new era of unstoppable optimism. The war was over, technology was booming. The stock market was not just for the rich, it was a national obsession. Waiters and taxi drivers were all playing the market, convinced of easy riches. This entire speculative fantasy was fueled by a new, dangerous, and seductive invention. That invention was called buying on margin. Margin was a simple, intoxicating idea. You only had to put down 10% to buy a stock. The other 90%, you borrowed it from the broker. This meant that for every $100 you had, you could control $1,000 of stock. If the stock went up just 10%, you doubled your investment. It was a national gambling hall where everyone was betting with borrowed money. And for a while, every single person was winning. But you have to ask the critical question, who was supplying this ocean of cheap, easy credit? Where was all this borrowed money coming from? It was coming from the Federal Reserve, the same institution we exposed in our previous report. The Fed, in its infancy, kept interest rates artificially low for years. It was the Fed that poured the gasoline onto the speculative fire. It created the bubble. Then, in 1928, after years of fueling the mania, the Fed suddenly saw the monster it had built. It decided it needed to tap the brakes. It began raising interest rates, trying to cool down the white-hot market. But you cannot cool down a wildfire, you can only suffocate it. The cheap money that had fueled the endless climb began to dry up. The highly leveraged margin investors started to feel the squeeze. On October 29, 1929, a day we now call Black Tuesday, the margin calls came. The bubble popped. In a matter of weeks, the market lost the equivalent of trillions in today's money. The nation was shattered. The party was over. Now this is the story they teach you in school. The Roaring Twenties bubble led to the Great Crash, and the Great Crash led to the Great Depression. It sounds simple. It is also completely wrong. This is the most important and most terrifying part of the story. The stock market crash of 1929 did not cause the Great Depression. The crash was just the symptom. The disease was the policy response that came next. As the panic from Wall Street spread to Main Street, a natural human reaction took place. People ran to their local banks to pull out their savings. They wanted hard, physical cash. But the banks, which had been gambling with that money in the stock market bubble, did not have it. They began to fail. At first, by the dozen, then by the hundreds. This was the exact moment the Federal Reserve was created for. The very reason for its existence was to be the lender of last resort. Its job was to step in during a panic and provide liquidity to the banks, to stop the bank runs and stabilize the entire system. And the Federal Reserve, in the face of the greatest financial panic in American history, nothing. It stood by, and it watched. It watched as over 9,000 banks in the United States failed, one by one. Why did they do this? Historians and economists still debate it. Some say it was incompetence. Others say it was a deliberate, calculated move, a liquidation of the small banks so the big, powerful banks could take over. The reason is irrelevant. The result is what matters. With every single bank that died, the nation's money supply vanished. When a bank fails, the deposits inside it are not transferred, they are destroyed. Between 1929 and 1933, the money supply contracted by over 30%. There was simply no money left to run the economy. Businesses could not pay their workers. Farmers could not sell their crops. The economic engine seized. That was the Great Depression. It was not a stock market crash. It was a systemic collapse, caused directly by the Federal Reserve's inaction, that is the 1929 playbook. First, they use low interest rates to create the bubble. Second, they raise rates to pop the bubble. And third, they stand aside and let the real economy, the small banks, the businesses, and the workers burn to the ground. Now, fast forward to today. Does this three-step playbook sound familiar? Step 1. Create the bubble. We just lived through the biggest one in history. After the 2008 crisis, what did the Fed do? They took the 1920s playbook and put it on steroids. They dropped interest rates to zero. They held them there for over a decade. But this time they added a new weapon, quantitative easing, printing trillions of dollars out of thin air. They didn't just fuel a bubble. They created the everything bubble, the most massive, simultaneous, speculative bubble in all of human history, across all assets. They created the roaring 2020s. Step 2. Pop the bubble. Then, in 2022, they looked at the raging inflation monster they had created and pretended to be shocked. So, just like in 1928, they tapped the brakes. They raised interest rates at the fastest pace in modern history. The free money party was over. The cheap credit that had funded everything was gone. The everything bubble ... popped. Step 3. Let the system die. We are living in this stage right now. This is the happening now part of the playbook. What happened immediately after the rate hikes? The fastest bank failures in US history. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic. They collapsed in a matter of hours, not weeks. They were the modern equivalent of the first 1930s bank runs. But this time, the Fed did not do nothing. They did something worse. They stepped in. They saved the system. They announced a new bailout program, the Bank Term Funding Program. They told the public not to panic, that all deposits would be safe, even the uninsured ones worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But this was not a fix. This was a delay. They did not solve the underlying problem. They just papered over it with more printed money. They saved the banks. They did not save the economy. Today, in 2025 and 2026, the real collapse is happening, just in slow motion. The high interest rates are still crushing the system. Commercial real estate, a massive part of every bank's balance sheet, is in a death spiral. Zombie corporations are finally going bankrupt in record numbers. These were companies that only survived because they could borrow at 0%. Now, their life support is gone. Credit card debt and auto loan defaults are at all-time highs. The average person is being squeezed to their breaking point. The 1929 playbook is happening again, but this time, it is supercharged. The bubble is 1,000 times larger. The debt is unimaginable. The Fed's solution in 2023 was just a temporary patch. They cannot lower interest rates, or inflation will return and destroy the dollar. They cannot keep interest rates high, or the entire debt market and the US Treasury itself will go bankrupt from the interest payments. They are trapped. The 1929 playbook has led them to its only possible conclusion. The roaring 20s of our era have just ended and the dirty 30s are just beginning. History is not just rhyming, it is repeating, line for line. The bill for the last decade of free money, the greatest speculative mania ever known, is finally, and inevitably, coming due. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed to. The only way to protect yourself is to see the playbook. You must understand the rules of the game they are playing. A game that was perfected in 19... Subscribe as we continue to expose the financial revelations that they do not want you to know. The collapse is not a theory, it's a schedule.